Waitress dropped her locket. "That's my brother's face," said the Mafia boss. The smell of burnt garlic and stale Chianti hung in the air at Rena's trattoria. It was a Tuesday, which meant the veal was tough and the customers were mean. From her station by the kitchen doors, Lila Romano could feel the anxiety rising in her throat, a familiar, coppery taste. It was 9 p.m., the last wave of the dinner rush, and every table in her section was full. Rena's was a relic, a holdout in the gritty, gentrifying downtown of Bellevue. The red and white checkered tablecloths were vinyl, sticky to the touch. The walls were covered in faded, fly-specked photos of Italian movie stars and Rena's grandchildren, all staring with the same bored expression. It was loud, it was hot, and for Lila, it was the only thing keeping her and Sophia afloat. "Lila, pick up," Marco, Rena's perpetually stressed son, barked from the kitchen window. "Working on it," she called back, her voice tight. She balanced 2 heavy plates of spaghetti and meatballs on one arm, her thin wrist aching from the strain. Her mind was not on the food, it was on the electric bill, sitting on their cramped apartment counter marked in red. Final notice. It was on her younger sister, Sophia, who was supposed to be at the public library 2 blocks over, a place that closed in 10 minutes. Sophia was 15, all sharp angles and teenage defiance, but to Lila, she was still the 9-year-old girl who had survived the crash that took their parents. Lila, then 19, had become a mother overnight. The anxiety was her constant companion, a shadow that clung to her more closely than her cheap, black apron, table 5, a group of businessmen already 3 bottles of wine deep, was getting loud. One of them snapped his fingers as she passed. "Garçon, more bread, and make it quick!" Lila flinched but didn't break stride. "Right away, sir." She dropped the spaghetti at table 7, a young couple who didn't look up from their phones. As she turned, the man from table 5 stood up, blocking her path. He was tall, red-faced, and smelled of sour wine and expensive cologne. "I said we need bread. Sweetheart, are you deaf?" "No, sir, I'm just what? You're just slow." He gestured impatiently, and the back of his hand struck the tray she was carrying. It was an accident, but a sharp one. Lila stumbled back, the tray clattering, a half-full water glass toppled, splashing ice and water onto the floor. "Damn it," the man cursed, looking at his wet shoe. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll clean that right up," Lila stammered, her face burning. She bent down, grabbing for the rolling cubes of ice. The chaos swelled around her, Marco yelling from the kitchen, the clatter of plates, the rising volume of the dining room. She felt a small, sharp tug at her neck, a tiny snap, but it was lost in the noise and her own humiliation. She didn't see the thin silver chain catch on the corner of the heavy wooden tray. She didn't see the small, tarnished locket fly free, skittering across the worn tile. It slid, unseen, across the floor and came to rest against the leg of the table in the darkest corner of the restaurant. The corner booth was always empty, reserved by tradition, at least. It had been, until 3 months ago. Now, one man occupied it every Tuesday and Thursday, from 7 until 10. The staff called him Mr. Mancini. They didn't know his first name. They knew he arrived in a car so black and polished it looked wet, a car that never parked at the curb but waited in the alley. They knew he wore suits that cost more than their monthly rent, always charcoal or black, with a white shirt buttoned to the collar, no tie. He was young, maybe 30, but he carried an ancient, weary stillness. He didn't read. He didn't use a phone. He just sat, nursing a single espresso, and watched. His presence silenced the area around him, creating a vacuum of fear and respect. His name was Dario Mancini, and his stillness was a lie. It was a carefully constructed dam holding back a decade of cold, calculating rage. He saw the locket fall. He saw the waitress, Lila, her face flushed with shame, scramble to clean up the mess. He saw the clumsy arrogance of the drunk businessman. He tracked the small glint of silver as it slid to a stop near his polished black shoe. He waited. He waited until Lila had returned with a towel, mopped up the water, apologized again to the belligerent customer, and disappeared into the kitchen. The restaurant's noise level returned to its normal, Dull roar. Dario leaned forward, a fluid movement with no wasted effort. His long fingers, clean and unadorned except for a faint, pale scar across his knuckles, closed around the small, warm piece of metal. He brought it to his palm. It was an antique, a simple silver oval, tarnished in the creases of its floral etching. It was light, hollow, a woman's trinket. It meant nothing. He shouldn't have opened it. It was a line of privacy he had no business crossing, but his thumb found the tiny, worn clasp, and a dull curiosity, a rare emotion for him, made him press it. The locket clicked open. Inside, protected by a piece of fogged, scratched plastic, was a faded photograph, a cheap school portrait, printed on flimsy paper, the colors washed out to pale blues and yellows. It was a boy, a teenager, maybe 15, with a mop of unruly dark hair and a smile that was all teeth and trouble. Dario's breath did not catch. It stopped. The clatter of the kitchen, the boisterous laughter from table 5, the tinny sound of an old Dean Martin song from the speakers. It all vanished. There was only a high, thin ringing in his ears. He knew the smile. He knew the small, distinctive mole just above the left eyebrow. He knew the chip in the front tooth from falling off a bicycle when he was 10. It was Luca, his brother, his younger brother. Luca, who had vanished 12 years ago. Luca, who had argued with their father, stormed out of the estate and was never seen again. Luca, who was presumed dead, a cold case file buried in a Bellevue police precinct drawer. Luca, whose disappearance had been the catalyst that hardened Dario from a grieving older brother into the cold, silent head of the Mancini family. He stared at the face, his hand so steady it looked carved from stone. His heart, however, had begun a slow, painful hammering against his ribs. It was impossible. It was a ghost. A small, trembling voice broke the spell. "Excuse me, sir." He looked up, slowly. Lila was standing there, her hands twisting in her damp apron. Her dark hair was falling out of its messy bun, and her eyes, large and brown and full of a familiar, hunted anxiety, were fixed on his hand. I think I dropped something. A locket. It was my mother's. Have you seen it?" Dario's expression was unreadable. He felt a strange, cold detachment as he watched her. This girl, this clumsy, nervous waitress, was holding a piece of his past. He slowly uncurled his fingers, revealing the open locket in his palm. Lila's shoulders slumped in a wave of relief so profound her knees visibly wobbled. "Oh, thank God! Thank you! I thought I'd lost it." She reached out, her fingers brushing his. His hand snapped shut. Lila froze, her hand hovering in the air. The suddenness of the movement, the quiet violence of it, terrified her. "Where?" Dario said, and his voice was not the polite murmur of a customer. It was low, gravelly, and scraped with a menace that made the hair on her arms stand on end. "Did you get this?" The restaurant was loud, but around their table, a pocket of absolute silence had formed. Lila couldn't breathe. His eyes, she realized, were not brown. They were a pale, icy gray, and they were looking at her as if she were a puzzle he intended to take apart. I told you, it was my mother's," she stammered, trying to pull her hand back, but he hadn't even been holding it. It was the force of his gaze that kept her pinned. "Your mother," he said it flatly. An echo. "The picture inside. Who is it?" "I don't know." The honest answer sounded like a lie, even to her. It's always been in there. It was my mother's. Please, it's the only thing I have left of her." Her voice cracked on the last word, and a flicker of something. Annoyance? Confusion? Passed over his face. He stared at her, his gaze intense, analytical. He was searching her face, her eyes, looking for a truth she didn't even possess. "Your mother's name," he demanded. It was not a question. It was an order. "Why?" she whispered, feeling a sudden, primal urge to run. Dario leaned forward just an inch. The small movement was more threatening than a shout. Her name. Angela Romano. The name landed in the space between them like a grenade. Lila saw his jaw clench, a single muscle flexing in his cheek. He knew the name. The realization hit her with the force of a slap. This stranger, this quiet, terrifying man, knew her dead mother's name. He stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He was connecting dots. She could see it in his eyes. He was looking at her hair, the shape of her jaw, the color of her eyes, and he was seeing something that wasn't there. Or perhaps something that was. With a sudden, violent finality, he stood. The heavy table jolted. Lila flinched, stumbling back a step. Dario Mancini looked down at her, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He opened his hand and dropped the locket onto the table. The small clink of silver on wood sounded like a gunshot in the quiet dread. Next to it, he threw down a crisp, folded $100 bill. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the restaurant. The other diners didn't seem to notice, but every waiter, every busboy, flattened themselves against the walls to let him pass. The front door opened and closed, and he was gone. Lila stood, trembling, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She snatched the locket, her fingers closing around it so tightly the etched edges dug into her palm. She ignored the money and ran, her footsteps echoing in her own ears, into the kitchen, through the back hallway, and into the employee bathroom. She locked the door and leaned against it, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. She opened her hand and stared at the locket, at the faded, smiling face of the boy she had never known. Who was he? And who, dear God, was the man in the corner? Outside, on the wet pavement, Dario Mancini slid into the back of a black Maserati. The engine purred to life. "Enzo," he said to the man in the driver's seat. Enzo, a thick-set man with a face like a Roman coin, met his gaze in the rearview mirror. He said nothing, waiting. "The waitress at my table. Her name is Lila Romano. Her mother was Angela Romano." Enzo's eyes widened, just slightly. It was the only sign of surprise Dario had ever seen from him. "Find out everything," Dario ordered, his voice flat and dead. "Where she lives, who she talks to, every parking ticket, every doctor's visit, everything. And put a car on her. I want to know every time she breathes." Enzo nodded once. "And the mother?" Dario stared out the window as the car pulled silently away from the curb, blending into the city's indifferent traffic. "Find out where she's buried." The walk home was always the worst part. The 2-bedroom apartment she shared with Sophia was 8 blocks from Rena's. In a part of Bellevue the new condo developments hadn't touched. The streetlights were mostly broken, and the alleys smelled of damp garbage and decay. Lila met Sophia at the bus stop, as promised. Her sister was shivering, her thin school blazer pulled tight. "You're late," Sophia complained, falling into step beside her. "I'm freezing and I'm starving. Did you bring anything?" "Sorry, Soph. It was a rough night." Lila's hand was in her pocket, her knuckles white as she gripped the locket. The encounter with the man, with Dario Mancini, had replayed in her mind 100 times. "Whatever, Mrs. Gable gave me a C on my history paper. A C. She hates me." Lila tried to focus, to summon the energy for parental concern. "Did you do the reading?" "Mostly. It's boring. It's all about tariffs." Lila half listened, her gaze scanning the street, flinching at every shadow, every passing headlight. She felt exposed, as if the man's icy gaze was still on her. She kept seeing the way he'd looked at her when she said her mother's name. It wasn't just recognition. It was something else, something like judgment. They turned onto their street, a row of tired, pre-war brick buildings with rusted fire escapes. A dark SUV was parked across from their building. Lila stopped. "What?" Sophia asked, annoyed. "Lila, come on, I have to pee." "Shh." The SUV was not a model she recognized. It was big, black, and immaculate. It looked alien on their street of dented sedans and rusted pickup trucks. The windows were tinted so dark they reflected the dim streetlight like mirrors. The engine was on. She could feel the low, subsonic thrum of it in the pavement, a cold dread, sharper and more immediate than her usual anxiety, seized her. "Lila, you're scaring me." "What is it?" "Get your keys out," Lila said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. She grabbed Sophia's arm, her grip painfully tight, and started walking. Fast. "Don't run, just walk. Get to the door." "You're hurting me." What's wrong with you? Just walk. Sophia, now. They crossed the street, their footsteps sounding unnaturally loud on the empty sidewalk. Lila could feel the SUV behind her. She didn't dare look back. She could feel the unseen eyes watching them. They reached the front steps of their building. Sophia fumbled with the key ring, the metal jangling. "Hurry," Lila hissed. "I'm trying. The stupid lock always sticks." Lila glanced over her shoulder. The SUV hadn't moved. Its headlights were off, but the low, idling hum was the most threatening sound she had ever heard. It was waiting, patient. The key finally turned. The heavy outer door groaned open. Lila shoved Sophia into the dim, musty-smelling entryway. Go, up the stairs." Lila followed, pulling the door shut behind them. The lock clicked, a sound that offered no comfort at all. She leaned against the door, her entire body shaking, and listened. She heard nothing but Sophia's receding footsteps on the stairs and the pounding of her own blood in her ears. And then, through the thick wood of the door, she heard the quiet, heavy thunk of a car door closing. She squeezed her eyes shut, her hand flying to her chest, her fingers closing around the familiar, solid shape of the locket. It was no longer a comfort. It was a cold, heavy weight, a piece of a puzzle she never knew existed, one that had just been noticed by a man who looked like he didn't stop until he had all the pieces. Dario Mancini's office was silent, the only light coming from a green-shaded banker's lamp on his massive, clear mahogany desk. The rest of Bellevue, its noise and its filth, was held back by 3 inches of soundproof glass. On the desk, between a heavy crystal ashtray and a leather-bound blotter, sat the faded school portrait of his brother, Luca. He had retrieved the original from his father's locked study. Enzo stood before the desk, his hands clasped behind his back. He never sat in Dario's presence. "The report," Dario said. It was not a question. Enzo placed a thin, manila folder on the blotter. Angela Romano, born in Bellevue, unmarried, worked as a maid at the Mancini estate for 2 years, from 1998 to 2000. Dario's eyes remained fixed on the photo. 2000. The year Luca vanished. "She was fired," Enzo continued, his voice a flat, neutral tenor. "By your father. Abruptly. No severance. The termination notes list theft. But there was no police report filed. When? October 12th, 2000. The night before..." Enzo paused. "The night before my brother disappeared." Dario finished, his voice devoid of emotion. He finally looked up. "Go on." "She vanished, dropped off the grid. No forwarding address, no final paycheck collected. She resurfaced 2 years later, across town, with a daughter, Lila Romano. Date of birth is consistent with her showing up in Bellevue." Dario's gaze hardened. A daughter, not a son. That's the official record. But the neighbors at her first known apartment, a tenement on the west side, were questioned. The file is 12 years old, but 2 of them remembered her. They said she was terrified, always looking over her shoulder, and they said she had a baby. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. "They remember a baby boy," Enzo stated, his eyes meeting Dario's. "A dark-haired infant. She kept him hidden. A few months later, the boy was gone. Only the girl, Lila, remained. Angela told the landlord the boy had been sent to live with his father. There was no father on record." Dario leaned back in his chair, the old leather groaning, the dates aligned with a sickening precision. Angela, fired for theft. Luca, gone. Angela, hiding a baby boy. "She stole the locket," Dario murmured, more to himself than to Enzo. "She took it from Luca's room." "It appears so," Enzo said. But the rest, a baby boy disappearing at the same time as Luca, and this girl, Lila, left holding the one thing that connects them. "This girl knows nothing," Dario said, the words sharp. "I saw it in her eyes. She's terrified of her own shadow. She's not a player." "Perhaps," Enzo allowed, "but if our father's old associates, or the Costas, ever made this connection, they wouldn't care if she's a player or not. A loose end from that time, with Luca's face in her pocket. She's a liability, a ghost." Dario stared at the picture of the smiling, ignorant boy. She's not a ghost. She's bait, and someone else is starting to smell the blood in the water. Stay on her. Double the surveillance. I want to know if she buys a different brand of toothpaste." Lila felt the eyes on her for 2 full days. The black SUV was gone. She told herself she was being paranoid, that her encounter with the man in the restaurant had just rattled her, but the feeling remained. It was a cold spot on the back of her neck, a prickling awareness that she was no longer anonymous. It was at the grocery store that she knew she wasn't imagining it. She was in the produce aisle, comparing the price of wilted lettuce to a bag of potatoes, her mind calculating pennies. When she saw him, he was nondescript, wearing a gray windbreaker, pretending to study a rack of onions. But his eyes were still. He wasn't shopping. He was waiting. Lila's blood ran cold. She abandoned her cart and hurried toward the dairy section. She walked quickly, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. She grabbed a carton of milk and glanced back. He was there, at the end of the aisle, next to the yogurt, seemingly fascinated by the cheese selection. Panic, sharp and metallic, rose in her throat. She moved again, weaving through the frozen foods, her heart hammering. He didn't follow her directly. He mirrored her, always one aisle over, a shadow she couldn't shake. She paid for the milk in cash, her hands trembling so badly she dropped the change. She all but ran from the store. On the street corner, 2 blocks away, she looked back. A gray sedan she didn't recognize was parked across from the market. The man in the gray windbreaker got in the passenger side. She ran all the way home. "Who do I report to?" she said, her voice shaking, into her cheap, buzzing landline. "I'm being followed." The desk sergeant at the precinct on the other end of the line sighed, a sound of profound boredom. "Ma'am, is he threatening you? Has he approached you?" "No, but he's watching me. He was in the store, and now he's in a car. This is the 2nd time. There was an SUV outside my apartment." "Lady, this is Bellevue. Looking at someone isn't a crime. You want to file a report. You have to come down here. But if he hasn't done anything, there's nothing we can do." "So I have to wait until he does something?" Lila cried, her voice cracking. "Have a nice day, ma'am." The line clicked. Lila slammed the phone down, choking back a sob of frustration. She was alone. Utterly, completely alone. Dario waited until 1 a.m. He knew her shift at Rena's ended at 12:30. He knew she and the other waitstaff usually spent 30 minutes cleaning and cashing out. He stood in the alleyway across from the restaurant's back exit, a narrow chasm between 2 brick buildings that smelled of sour garbage and stale beer. He was out of the car, Enzo waiting at the corner. He had to do this himself. The metal door creaked open, and Lila emerged. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She pulled her thin jacket tight and started the walk toward the main street. "Miss Romano!" His voice cut through the damp night air. It was not loud, but it stopped her cold. Lila spun around, her eyes wide with terror. He was just a shape in the darkness, standing perfectly still. "You," she breathed, taking a step back. "We need to talk." He stepped forward, just enough for the single, flickering street lamp to catch the sharp lines of his face. He was not wearing his suit jacket, just the white shirt and dark trousers. He looked less like a customer and more like what he was, a predator. "Leave me alone," she said, her voice rising. "I'm going to scream. I'll call the police." "You already called them," he said calmly, taking another slow step. "They told you to have a nice day." Lila's breath hitched. That, more than anything, confirmed her terror. He knew. "You're stalking me. Those men, the car, the grocery store, that's you. I'm protecting you." "Protecting me?" She laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "By terrifying me. Stay away from me. Stay away from my sister." She turned to run. "The boy in the locket," he said, his voice stopping her again. "I believe he is my brother." She faced him, her back pressed against the gritty brick wall. "What? That's impossible." "My mother. Your mother was a maid at my family's home. She was fired the day before my brother disappeared, 12 years ago. She left with your locket, a locket that belonged to my brother. And now, you are wearing it." He laid the facts out like stones, each one heavier than the last. Lila could only shake her head, her mind refusing to process the words. I don't know anything about that. It's just a picture. It's just a locket. Please, just leave me alone." He was close now, only a few feet away. She could smell the faint, clean scent of starch and something expensive and spicy. "I believe you don't know," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, which was somehow more frightening. "But you are connected to something you don't understand, something my family's enemies have been waiting for. They are not as patient as I am. They won't ask you questions." "What do you want from me?" she whispered, tears of fear and frustration stinging her eyes. "I want you to be safe," he said. The words sounded foreign in his own mouth. "Until I figure out what your mother did." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, black business card with a single, 10-digit phone number embossed on it. "You're in danger. When you realize it, call this number. Someone will come." Lila stared at the card, then at his face. "I'm not taking that. I'm not getting involved in whatever you are." She pushed past him, breaking into a run. Dario watched her go, her footsteps echoing down the empty street until they were gone. He didn't follow. He stood in the alley for a long time, then turned and walked back to the car. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. Sophia was a small lump in the twin bed across the tiny room. Lila lay on her own bed, the locket clutched in her hand, the man's words echoing in her head. "I believe he is my brother." It was almost 3 a.m. when she heard it, a faint scraping sound from the kitchen. She froze. Their building was old. It made noise, but this was different. This was deliberate. It was the sound of metal on metal, the old grate over their kitchen window being pried. She slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cold linoleum. She grabbed the one weapon she owned, a heavy, half-empty wine bottle from on top of the fridge she used as a rolling pin. She stood in the hallway, her body trembling so violently she could barely breathe. The grate gave way with a low groan. A shadow detached itself from the window, landing with a soft thud on the kitchen floor. A man, dressed in black, wearing a ski mask, paused, listening. Lila's scream died in her throat. She could only stare, paralyzed. The man saw her. He lunged. Lila swung the bottle, but he was too fast. He knocked it from her hand, the glass shattering. He grabbed her by the shirt, slamming her back against the wall. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. She couldn't even scream. "Where is it?" a gruff voice hissed through the mask. "The locket. Give it to me." He saw it, the chain gleaming against her collar. His gloved hand shot out, not for the locket, but for her throat. Suddenly, the apartment door exploded inward, splintering off its hinges. 2 men, both massive, dressed in dark suits, filled the doorway. It was Enzo, the man from Dario's car, and another. The intruder spun, releasing Lila. He pulled a knife. He never had the chance to use it. Enzo moved with a speed that was terrifying. There was a sickening, muffled crack as he struck the man in the throat. The intruder collapsed, gagging, clutching his neck. The other man was on him instantly. A thick, chemically soaked rag clamped over the intruder's mouth and nose. Within seconds, the man was limp. Sophia was screaming from the bedroom, a high-pitched, terrified wail. Lila had slid to the floor, choking and sobbing, clutching her throat. Her hand was scraped raw and bloody where she had tried to break her fall against the splintered doorframe. Enzo didn't even look at the man on the floor. He turned to Lila. His face was granite. "Mister, Mancini was right. You are not safe." He pulled out his phone, spoke 2 words, and hung up. "Pack a bag, both of you. You have 5 minutes." The ride to the estate was a blur. Lila sat in the back of the black Maserati, wedged between a still sobbing Sophia and the silent bulk of Enzo. Her mind was blissfully, terrifyingly empty. She was in shock. They left the city, climbing into the hills of Bellevue Heights, a place she had only ever seen in magazines. They passed through a 20-foot-high wrought-iron gate, a guardhouse with armed men, and up a winding, crushed gravel driveway. The house wasn't a house. It was a fortress, a sprawling, Italianate-style mansion of pale stone and dark-tiled roofs, overlooking the distant, glittering lights of the city she had just fled. Enzo opened her door. Lila and Sophia stumbled out. Sophia's sobs had quieted to whimpers, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and, bizarrely, awe. Dario Mancini was waiting for them in the grand two-story foyer. The floor was black and white marble. A chandelier the size of a small car hung above them. He was standing at the base of a sweeping staircase, his arms crossed. "Sophia, go with him," he said, nodding to the second man. "He'll show you to your rooms, get you some food." Sophia looked at Lila. Lila, her throat raw, could only nod. She watched her sister, her only family, be led away up the massive staircase. Now she was alone with him. The silence of the vast hall was deafening. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Lila looked down at her hand. She hadn't even realized it was bleeding. She had scraped it raw on the wall, and glass shards from the bottle were embedded in her palm. She started, but her voice was a croak. He said nothing. He simply took her by the elbow, his grip firm but not rough, and steered her through a set of tall, dark wood doors into a library. It was filled with thousands of books, a fireplace, and the smell of leather and old paper. He pushed her gently into a deep leather armchair and retrieved a metal first aid box from a drawer. He knelt in front of her, taking her injured hand in his. His hands were warm. They were large, clean, the knuckles scarred. He was utterly focused as he poured antiseptic onto a cotton pad. "This will sting," he said. Lila winced as he dabbed at the raw skin, his movements precise, efficient, and strangely gentle. He used a pair of tweezers to extract two small, dark triangles of glass. She watched him, his dark hair falling forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a killer. He was a stalker. And he was being tender. The contradiction was making her dizzy. He finished cleaning the wound and began to wrap it in a white gauze bandage. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her inner wrist, and a jolt, entirely separate from her fear, shot up her arm. He paused. His thumb had come to rest directly on her pulse point. He could feel the frantic, terrified bird of her heart beating against his skin. He looked up, his pale gray eyes meeting hers. The air in the room evaporated. There was no noise, no city, no intruders. There was only a few inches of space between them, thick with an intensity that was suffocating. His gaze dropped to her mouth, just for a second, then back to her eyes. His fingers, still holding her wrist, tightened, just slightly. He was holding her, and she was his prisoner. Lila pulled her hand back as if she'd been burned, a sharp, breathless gasp escaping her. She scrambled out of the chair, backing away until her shoulders hit a bookshelf. "I need to check on Sophia," she whispered, her voice trembling. Dario rose slowly, his face unreadable. He watched her flee the room, her hand pressed to her chest, her whole body vibrating with a new kind of fear. Upstairs. Sophia was already bouncing on the bed in their assigned suite. "Lila, oh my God, this bed is like a cloud. And did you see the bathroom? It has gold faucets." "Gold? Is this where he lives? Is he, like, a billionaire?" Lila stood in the doorway, staring at the opulent room. It was bigger than their entire apartment, decorated in cream and gold, with a balcony overlooking the city. It was the most beautiful prison she had ever seen. "Lila?" Sophia's excitement faded as she saw her sister's pale, stricken face. "What's wrong? Why do you look so sad? That guy, Dario, he's scary. But he saved us, right? We're safe here, aren't we?" "Yes." "Soph," Lila said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "We're safe." In a security room in the basement, Dario Mancini watched a wall of high-definition monitors. He saw Sophia bouncing on the bed. He saw Lila walk to the window, her silhouette small and fragile against the vast, dark city. He watched her check the locks on the door, even though they were 100 yards from the main gate. He switched the feed, a low-light camera in the guest suite's main room. Lila was sitting on the floor, her back against the bed, her knees drawn to her chest. She was asleep, or trying to be, her exhaustion finally overwhelming her. The locket was still around her neck. He watched her, his expression cold, his mind calculating. He was drawn to her, to the stubborn, terrified innocence she wore like armor. She was a link to a past he had buried, a wound he had thought long scarred. She was Angela Romano's daughter. She was the girl holding Luca's picture, and she was sleeping under his roof, a beautiful, vulnerable anomaly in his world of structured violence. He was haunted by her, and by the question he couldn't yet answer. Was she the key to finding his brother, or was she just another ghost? The hunt for Angela Romano's ghost had begun. Dario, in the cold, gray light of his office, gave Enzo a single final command. I don't want old employee files. I don't want gossip. I want the truth. I want to know who she spoke to, who she slept with, who she was. Tear my father's past apart. Use whatever resources you need. Find the connection. Enzo, impassive as ever, simply nodded and left. He was a man who specialized in unearthing buried sins, and Alberto Mancini's past was a graveyard in the sun-drenched prison of the Mancini estate. Lila was losing her mind. The first few days were a blur of terror and gratitude. Sophia, on the other hand, was thriving. She had discovered the indoor pool, a fully stocked movie theater, and a kind, elderly housekeeper named Mrs. Venti, who found her spirited and kept her supplied with Italian sodas and fresh-baked cookies. "Lila, this place is insane," Sophia said, her mouth full of biscotti, her feet propped on a silk ottoman in their suite. "It's like we won the lottery. But first we got attacked, which is weird, but I'm kind of okay with the winning part." Lila couldn't share the enthusiasm. She felt like a specimen under glass. The armed guards at the gates, the silent staff who appeared and disappeared, the heavy, oppressive luxury. It all screamed that she was property, not a guest. And then there was Dario. He was a ghost in his own home. She would feel his presence before she saw him, a shift in the air, a sudden tension in her shoulders. She would turn, and he would be at the end of a long hallway, watching her. Or she would be in the vast two-story library, and he would be on the mezzanine above, a dark shape against the light. They never spoke. He just watched, his pale, assessing gaze making her feel both invisible and painfully exposed. She needed to make sense of it. The man, the locket, the attack, her mother. On the fourth day, she found him in the kitchen. It was a massive, industrial-sized room, but he was alone at a small wooden table, drinking a black espresso, staring at a folded newspaper. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up. The silence stretched, and she felt the familiar urge to flee instead. She tightened the belt on the silk robe they had provided her, a robe that probably cost more than her apartment's rent. "The locket," she said, her voice sounding small in the cavernous room. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He waited. I've been thinking about what you said, about my mother." She stepped inside, moving to the other side of the table, keeping the heavy wood between them. "I always knew she was hiding something. She was a sad woman. Mr. Mancini. She was always looking over her shoulder, just like I was. She hated when I asked about my father, about her past. She said it was all gone, that it didn't matter." She pulled the locket out from under the robe. Her hand was shaking. But this was different. It wasn't just a memory. It was important. She never let me touch it. When I was little, I tried to open it, and she slapped my hand, so hard it left a mark. Lila's eyes were distant, lost in the memory. She told me, "This is all I have left of a life I deserved. Don't you ever touch it. I thought it was a picture of my father, or a brother I never knew." She looked at him, her gaze sharp and pleading. "I never knew who it was, I promise." "I believe you," Dario said, his voice quiet. The admission surprised them both. He looked at the locket, then at her. "She never told you anything else? No names, no places from her past?" "No, just Bellevue. Just survival. She told me to stay invisible, to not make trouble. That's all I've ever tried to do. A flicker of something. Pity, perhaps." Though it looked colder on his face, passed through his eyes. He stood up. "Mrs. Venti will have breakfast for you. And for Sophia. Don't wander too far. The West Wing is under construction." He left her there, standing in the cold, cavernous kitchen, feeling more alone than ever. His warning was a mistake. It was an invitation. Later that afternoon, while Sophia was watching a movie at a volume that shook the walls, Lila found herself drawn to the west wing. It was roped off with a single velvet cord. She slipped under it. This part of the house was different. It wasn't sterile and perfect. It was old. Dust cloths covered the furniture like shrouds, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and polish. She walked down a long, dark-paneled hallway, the only sound the soft padding of her slippers on the marble floor. She found a door, slightly ajar. Curiosity, or maybe a desperate need for answers, pulled her in. It was a sitting room, or perhaps a study. Unlike the rest of the house, the dust cloths had been pulled back. The room was preserved. Not under construction, it was a shrine. The walls were covered in framed photographs, dozens of them, capturing a life she couldn't imagine. She saw a stern, unsmiling man with Dario's eyes, who she assumed was his father. She saw a younger, happier version of Dario standing on a boat, squinting into the sun. And then, in the very center of the main wall, she saw it. It was a small, tarnished silver frame. She stepped closer, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat. Inside the frame, behind a clean pane of glass, was the boy from her Locket. It was the same cheap, faded school portrait, the same unruly hair, the same chipped-toothed smile. A duplicate. A cold dread washed over her, followed by a wave of profound, heartbreaking validation. She was not crazy. The man in the restaurant, Dario, hadn't been lying. This boy, this face she had carried with her for her entire life, belonged here, in this house. It was my brother's room, Lila gasped. Spinning around, Dario was standing in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He wasn't angry. He just looked empty. His face was bleak, etched with a grief so old it had become a part of his features. I'm sorry, she stammered, gesturing at the velvet rope in the hall. You said, I didn't. It's all right. He walked into the room, his gaze fixed on the wall of photos. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His name was Luca. He was 15. He reached out, his long fingers tracing the edge of the silver frame. This was his... my mother gave us matching ones. What happened to him, she whispered. Dario's hand clenched into a fist, his knuckles white. He stared at the picture of the smiling boy for a long, silent moment. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of 12 years of unanswered questions. We had a fight, Dario said, his voice low and rough, as if the words were being dredged up from somewhere deep and painful. Not me and Luca, our father, Alberto. He was a hard man, a cold man. He expected me to be like him. But Luca... A shadow of a smile touched his lips. Luca was different. He was bright. He laughed too loud. He wasn't made for this world. For our world. He turned from the wall, moving to the window, staring out at the manicured lawns. Luca defied him. It was a stupid argument about a girl, about money. It was always about money or control. Luca told him he hated him. He told him he was leaving. Our father, he told him if he walked out that door, he was never to come back, and he was not to take the Mancini name with him. Lila stood, frozen, watching his back. Luca stormed out. He was supposed to meet me, Dario continued, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it, at a cafe downtown. He was going to take a bus, go to the coast. I was supposed to bring him money, enough to get him started, to keep him safe until I could fix things. He was silent for a long time, but I was late. I had business. His voice dried of all emotion. Something I couldn't move. By the time I got to the cafe, he was gone. He never showed up. No one ever saw him again. The police found his jacket in an alley 2 blocks from the bus station. But that was it. Nobody, no note. Just gone. He finally turned to face her, and his pale eyes were raw. I let him down. He was my brother. I was supposed to protect him. I was late, and he vanished. Lila felt a tear slip down her own cheek. It wasn't just his story. It was the guilt. She knew what that felt like. The guilt of survival. The guilt of not being there. That's not your fault, she whispered. He looked at her, a strange, intense light in his eyes. You are the first person to see his face in 12 years who didn't know him, and you've been carrying him with you this whole time. Tell me what that means. Lila." She had no answer. She just stood there, her heart breaking for this terrible, cold, sad man, and for the boy in the picture. That evening, the fragile truce of shared grief changed the atmosphere of the house. Lila found she couldn't stay in her room. She went to the garden, a place of stone terraces and fountains, overlooking the glittering, indifferent lights of Bellevue. She found him there, standing at a low stone wall, a glass of red wine in one hand. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He merely gestured to a second glass, sitting on the wall next to an open bottle. "You look like you could use this." She hesitated, then took the glass. The wine was dark, rich. She took a sip, the alcohol warming her instantly. They stood in silence for a long time, the only sound the distant hum of the city and the burble of a nearby fountain. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, looking at the view. "I've lived my whole life down there. I never knew a place like this existed." "It's a cage," he said, his voice flat. "A pretty one, but it keeps the world out. And it keeps you in. It's keeping me safe." "Is it?" He turned to her. The moonlight caught the silver in his pale eyes. "The man who attacked you. He was looking for the locket. He was sent by the Costa family. My rivals. They heard a rumor that a ghost from my father's past had resurfaced. They don't know what it means, but they know it matters to me. Which makes you a target. So I'm leveraged." "You're a complication," he corrected, his voice softer. He reached out, his hand moving with a slowness that felt deliberate, rehearsed. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, the calloused pads of his fingertips grazing her skin. "A beautiful, terrifying complication." His hand lingered, his thumb stroking the curve of her cheekbone. Lila's breath caught, his touch. It wasn't the detached, clinical touch from when he'd bandaged her hand. This was different. It was heavy, possessive. Her body responded before her mind could, her head tilting, leaning into the warmth of his palm. Her eyes fluttered closed. For one single, insane moment, she felt cherished. Then reality crashed in. This was her jailer, a man who spoke of rivals and attacks, a man whose brother was missing because of business. She pulled back, a small, choked sound escaping her. I don't know who you are." "Don't you?" he murmured. He didn't retreat. Instead, he placed his wine glass on the wall and cupped her face with both hands, forcing her to look at him. "You're the only person in 12 years who has looked at me like I'm a man and not a monster. Or a paycheck." You're safe, Lila," he whispered, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "I will not let them touch you." He leaned in, slowly, giving her every opportunity to turn, to run. She was paralyzed, caught in the intensity of his gaze, the warmth of his hands, the sudden, desperate hope that he was telling the truth. His lips met hers. It was not a rough kiss. It was not demanding. It was a question. It was hesitant, slow, a searching brush of his mouth against hers. It was freighted with a decade of his grief and a lifetime of her loneliness. He tasted like red wine and a cold, deep sadness. Then she responded, her hands, which had been pressed against his chest, fisted in his shirt. A small, broken sound came from her throat, and she kissed him back, a flood of pent-up fear and exhaustion and a desperate, aching need for contact. The kiss deepened, his mouth slanting over hers, one hand sliding from her jaw down her throat, to the back of her neck, pulling her closer. It was a kiss of bottled emotion, of two people who had been holding their breath for years and were finally, desperately, exhaling. "I shouldn't," she whispered, her lips brushing his. "I know," he breathed, his mouth moving to her jaw, his lips hot against her skin. He pulled her flush against him, his body hard and warm. She felt, for the first time in her life, utterly and completely safe. His arms were a fortress. She was his. He ran one hand down her back, a long, possessive stroke that traced her spine, ending at the small of her back, pressing her more firmly against him. He kissed her temple, burying his face in her hair, breathing her in. Lila trembled in his arms. It was the cold night air, the shock, the sheer, overwhelming power of his presence. Dario felt the tremor. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His breathing was ragged, his chest rising and falling. He looked into her eyes, his own dark with an emotion she couldn't name. It was raw, hungry, and pained. "Not tonight," he said, his voice a rough rasp. He was protecting her, she realized, from the world and from himself. He released her, his hands dropping, though he looked like it cost him everything. The next morning, Lila woke up in her own bed, but her lips still felt the ghost of his. She was confused, dizzy with hope. She dressed in the simple clothes they had provided and drifted downstairs, drawn by a need to see him in the light of day. She heard his voice. He was in his study, the one he used for business, the door ajar. It was not the voice from the garden. "I don't care if he has a family," Dario's voice snapped, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "He made a move. He cost me. I want him gone. Make it look like business. No, on second thought, make it look like me. I want them to know who's coming for them." Lila froze, her hand pressed to her mouth. The blood in her veins turned to ice. The man who had held her, who had kissed her with such aching tenderness, was calmly ordering someone's death. The safety she had felt was an illusion. The man was real, but the monster was, too. She backed away, silent as a shadow, her heart, which had felt so full in the garden, now a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She had made a terrible, terrible mistake, miles away, in a sterile records office downtown. Enzo hung up the phone. He had just finished a call with a very old, very private investigator who owed him a favor. He looked down at the file in front of him. It was a bank record dated October 19th, 2000, a wire transfer for $100,000 from an account managed by Alberto Mancini to a new account opened in the name of Angela Romano. The transfer was 1 week after Luca's disappearance. He opened a second file, a birth record from a private clinic. 9 months later, mother, Angela Romano, father, blank. But the final, damning piece of paper was a copy of a hotel security log, a private suite, registered to Alberto Mancini for a recurring meeting every Tuesday for a year. The other guest on the log, who was signed in as staff access, Angela Romano. Enzo closed the file. His boss had wanted the connection. He had found it. Angela Romano wasn't just a maid. She was the old man's mistress, and she had been paid a fortune to disappear with a child. The cold light of morning did nothing to erase the memory of Dario's voice. Lila spent the day in a fugue state, trapped in the gilded cage of the guest suite, the kiss on the terrace feeling like a betrayal, and his overheard words like a death sentence. She was a fool. She had let her loneliness, her desperation for safety, blind her to the man he was. He wasn't a protector. He was a monster who had shown her a moment of kindness. She avoided him, her fear now laced with a bitter, cold shame. She kept Sophia close, playing cards and watching movies, pretending this was a vacation, all while her insides twisted into knots. The call came for Dario late in the afternoon. He was in his study, the door firmly closed this time. When Enzo entered without knocking, Enzo's face, normally a mask of impassive stone, was tight. He placed a thin, worn leather ledger and 2 notarized documents on Dario's desk. "What is this?" Dario asked, not looking up from his own work. "It's the truth," Enzo said. "The connection you asked for?" Dario looked up, his pale eyes narrowing. "Your father, Alberto, was meticulous," Enzo said, tapping the ledger. "He kept a private record of all household expenditures. This one is from 1998 to 2000. Angela Romano is in it. Not for a maid's salary, for private services. Monthly payments, very large, in cash." A cold stillness settled over Dario. He opened the ledger. He saw the entries, his father's precise, arrogant script. Angela Romano, Angela Romano, Angela Romano. She was his mistress, Dario stated, his voice flat. "For almost 2 years, Enzo confirmed. He slid the other documents forward. This is a wire transfer confirmation. 1 week after Luca disappeared, $100,000 from your father's personal account to a new, unnamed account. The same day, Angela Romano was fired for theft. She was paid to disappear. She was pregnant, Dario said, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening, cold finality. He paid her to get rid of the child, or to take it and never come back. Enzo slid the final document over. It was a scanned copy of a birth certificate from a small, private clinic on the city's south side, dated 9 months after the payments began. Mother, Angela Romano. Father, blank. Child, Lila Romano. Dario stared at the name. Lila. Not a baby boy seen in a tenement. Not a hidden son. Lila. The room tilted. The air became too thin to breathe. The kiss in the garden. The hesitant searching. Tender touch of her lips flashed in his mind, and he felt a wave of self-disgust so profound it made him want to retch. Lila. His father's daughter. His sister. The door to the study opened. Lila stood there, her face pale, her hands clenched at her sides. She had finally worked up the courage to confront him, to ask him about the phone call, to demand to be let go. "I need to talk to you," she began, her voice trembling but firm. "I heard you this morning. I can't stay here. You can't just—" She stopped. She saw the look on his face. It was not the coldness of the killer she had overheard. It was not the pain tenderness of the man in the garden. It was a new expression. It was absolute, visceral horror. "Dario, what is it?" He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He looked at her as if she were a ghost, as if she were something obscene. "Get out, he whispered. "What? Get out," he roared, sweeping his arm across the desk. The ledger, the lamp, the crystal ashtray, everything went flying, crashing against the wall. Lila screamed, stumbling back. "Dario, you're scaring me." He came around the desk, his movements stiff, robotic. He was shaking, his face a mask of pale, cold sweat. He stopped a foot in front of her. He looked at her mouth, the one he had kissed, and his lip curled in revulsion. "You," he said, his voice a raw, strangled sound. "You were never supposed to exist." Lila's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? What did you find?" "The truth," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the scattered papers on the floor. "My father, your mother, you—" He couldn't say it. He turned away, his hands clenching and unclenching, his whole body radiating a violence that was barely contained. Enzo stepped forward, his face grim. He picked up the birth certificate from the floor and held it out to her. "Your mother, Angela, was our father's mistress. This is your birth record. You are Alberto Mancini's daughter." Lila's world stopped. The words didn't make sense. Her mother, a maid. Her father, blank. She took the paper, her hands shaking so badly she could barely read the printed words. Lila Romano. Mother, Angela Romano? This doesn't prove anything, she stammered, looking at Dario's back. It means you are my sister, Dario said, his voice dead. He turned to face her, his pale eyes stripped of all warmth, all tenderness. They were the eyes of a stranger, filled with ice and disgust. The woman I held, the woman I kissed. She is my father's blood, my sister. The word hit her like a physical blow. She staggered, her hand flying to her mouth. No, that's impossible. My mother, she would have said— She was paid to be silent, Dario snapped. She took his money and she hid you. She was supposed to stay gone. I didn't know, she sobbed, the paper crumbling in her hand. It was too much. The attack, the lies, the kiss, and now this ultimate, terrible truth. She looked at him, her vision blurring through tears. Dario, please, don't, he commanded. Don't say my name. Don't look at me. He turned to his enforcer. Enzo, get them out of here. Sir, relocate them. The safe house by the lake. Tonight. Put a full team on them. I don't want them in this house. He couldn't look at her. The sight of her made his skin crawl with a shame he couldn't bear. No, Lila cried, grabbing his arm. He flinched from her touch as if she were fire, ripping his arm away. Don't touch me. The rejection was absolute. It shattered what little strength she had left. "Dario, please, you can't just throw us out. I have nowhere else to go. She was begging, her voice cracking. "Talk to me, please. This changes everything, but it doesn't change me. I'm still the same person." He finally looked at her, his face a mask of torment. "No, you're not. You're my blood, and I'm your poison." His voice dropped to a low, agonizing whisper. "If you're my sister, I can't protect you like this. I can't even look at you. Every time I do, I see what I did, what I wanted to do." He turned his back on her. "Enzo, now, get her and the girl. I don't want to see her again." He walked out of the study, leaving Lila standing in the wreckage, her world destroyed. She sank to her knees, a single, broken wail of grief tearing from her throat. For Dario, the next 48 hours were a descent into a cold, familiar hell. He locked himself in his office, the bourbon bottle his only companion. He had cut out the part of himself that felt, the part that had leaned in, that had touched her cheek, that had felt safe with her. It was a sick, twisted joke. The one person who had breached his walls in a decade was the one person who was forbidden. He was a Mancini. His blood was his bond and his curse, and his blood now ran in her veins. He threw himself back into the work, his rage a purifying fire. He was cold, precise, and brutal. He tore into his ledgers, his shipments, his fronts. He needed to find the weakness in his organization, the one that had led the Costas to Lila. He needed to bleed his rivals for what they had done, for what they had almost made him do. The distraction, however, had already cost him. The Costa family, seeing his focus shift, seeing his best men assigned to a safe house by a lake, made their move. They didn't hit a high-value target. They hit a symbolic one. The old warehouse on the north side, the first one Alberto Mancini had ever bought. Dario was in his office when the call came. "Boss, it's the north warehouse. The Costas. They hit it hard. It's a 5-alarm fire. They took out 2 of our men." Dario felt nothing. No anger, just a cold, dead certainty. He stood up. "Enzo, get the car." The safe house was another beautiful prison. It was a modern glass box on the shore of a gray, choppy lake, 60 miles from Bellevue. Sophia was miserable. There was no pool. The internet was slow, and Lila was a zombie. Lila sat on a cold stone patio, staring at the water, a wool blanket wrapped around her. She was heartbroken. The shame had faded, replaced by a hollow, aching loss. She had lost the one person who had ever made her feel safe, and he had taken that safety with him. She was his sister. The word felt like a lie. It didn't feel like her mother. It didn't feel like her. She was watching the small television in the sterile living room, the local news on mute, when a headline made her heart stop. "Fire. Suspected arson at Northside Warehouse." The screen showed her city, her old life. Flames billowed into the night sky from a building she didn't recognize. But the reporter was standing in front of yellow police tape. In the background, she saw it, the black Maserati, Dario's car. Authorities suspect a link to organized crime, specifically the Mancini family, who are known to own this property. Fighting has reportedly broken out between rival factions. He was there. He was in the middle of that. She thought of the phone call she'd overheard. "Make it look like me. I want them to know who's coming. He wasn't just watching the fire. He was the fire. And he was in danger." She stood up. The 2 guards Enzo had left, a young one named Marco and an older one named Sal, looked at her. "I need to go back," she said. Sal stepped in front of her. "Miss Romano, our orders are clear. You don't leave this property." "I don't care about your orders," she said, her voice shaking but hard. "He's in trouble. I saw the news. That's his warehouse. I need to see him." "It's not safe. That's the whole point," Marco said gently. "Safe?" she laughed, a bitter sound. "I haven't been safe my entire life. I'm not safe here. The only time I ever felt safe was with him. Now move." She ran to the door. Sal grabbed her arm. Lila did something she had never done in her life. She fought. She kicked him in the shin, hard, and as he grunted, she clawed at his face. It was a pathetic, desperate attack, but it startled him. "Miss!" She ran out the door, into the cold night air, toward the car. Marco caught her at the driver's side door, grabbing her around the waist. "Let go of me! Let me go!" she screamed, beating her fists against his back. "Lila, stop! We can't let you go!" "Then you drive me!" she sobbed, collapsing against him. "Please, I have to know he's alive. Please, I'm begging you. He's my brother. I have to know." The word was a calculated lie, and it tasted like poison. But it worked. Sal sighed, rubbing his shin. He looked at Marco. He knew what Dario would do to them if they left their post. He also knew what he would do if he knew this girl was in agony, thinking he was dead. "Fine," Sal said, snatching the keys. "Marco, you stay. Lock the place down. Call Enzo. Tell him we're inbound. Tell him she's hysterical. You," he said, grabbing Lila's arm, "you're sitting in the back, and you don't make a sound." The warehouse district was a war zone. Police lights painted the smoke-filled streets in flashing strobes of red and blue. Sal had to park 3 blocks away. "Stay here," he ordered. "I mean it, kid. You step out of this car. I can't protect you." He got out, disappearing into the chaos. Lila waited for 30 seconds. Then she opened the door and ran. She ran toward the fire, dodging police officers and firemen. She heard Sal shouting her name, but she didn't stop. She saw the Maserati, parked in an alley, its headlights cutting through the smoke. She ran toward it. She found him. He was leaning against the alley wall, half hidden in the shadows. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was torn at the shoulder, and it was dark, stained dark, with blood, his own. Enzo was pressing a thick gauze pad to Dario's side, and Dario was pushing him away. "I'm fine," he growled, his face pale and slick with sweat. "You are not fine, boss. You took a piece of shrapnel." "Dario!" His head snapped up. Through the smoke, he saw her, Lila, running toward him, her face a mask of terror and tears, her hair wild. "Lila!" His voice was a rasp of disbelief. "What? Sal, get her out of here. Get her back in the car." "No!" She reached him, her hands hovering, afraid to touch the blood. His arm was bleeding, too, a long gash on his forearm. His face was smudged with soot. And he looked exhausted. He looked broken. "You're hurt," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Lila, you can't be here," he gritted out, trying to stand straight, trying to regain his authority. This is not a place for you." "I saw the news," she sobbed. "I saw the fire. I thought they killed you." She threw herself against him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face burying in his shoulder, ignoring the blood, the soot, the world that was burning around them. "I don't care," she whispered fiercely, her voice muffled against his skin. "I don't care who I am. I don't care if I'm your sister, or your anything. I don't care. You're the only one who's ever made me feel safe, and I thought you were dead." His entire body became rigid, her words, her warmth, her absolute reckless presence. It shattered his control. The disgust, the shame. It all evaporated, replaced by a raw, desperate, possessive need. His good arm, the one that wasn't bleeding, snaked around her waist, crushing her to him. He was supposed to push her away. He was supposed to be disgusted. He was supposed to be her brother. He wasn't. "You shouldn't have come," he breathed, his face burying in her hair. She smelled like the clean lake air and her own unique, terrified scent. "I'm not leaving you," she said, pulling back just enough to look at him. Their eyes met. And in that moment, the lie of their blood didn't matter. The fire, the police, the men he had just killed, none of it mattered. His kiss was not the hesitant, gentle exploration from the garden. It was a collision. It was rough, desperate, and punishing. It was a kiss of rage and relief, a claim. His mouth devoured hers, his hand tangled in her hair, yanking her head back, giving him deeper access. He tasted bourbon, smoke, and iron. Lila whimpered into his mouth, kissing him back with all the fear and desperation she had. This was wrong, it was madness, but it was the only thing that was real. Dario spun them, slamming her back against the cold, brick alley wall. The impact knocked the breath from her. He pinned her there with his body, his hips pressing her into the brick, his mouth never leaving hers. His breath was a hot, ragged hitch against her skin. He was trembling. She realized the monster was shaking. He broke the kiss, his forehead pressing against hers, his eyes squeezed shut. "I want you," he whispered, the words torn from his throat. "God help me. Lila, I want you too much to ruin you." He was fighting a war, not just with the Costas, but with himself, and he was losing. "Boss," Enzo said, his voice flat, emotionless. "We have to go. The police are starting to sweep the alleys." Dario didn't move for a long second. He took one last shuddering breath, his face still buried in her hair. Then he stepped back. The cold night air rushed between them. "Get her in my car," he ordered Sal, who had just run up, breathless. "Take her back to the lake, now." "No, Dario, I'm staying with you," Lila cried. Reaching for him, Dario turned away, not looking at her. "That's an order. Sal, get her out of Bellevue." He started walking toward Enzo, his hand pressed to his bleeding side. "Dario!" she screamed. He stopped, his back to her. "I will handle this," he said, his voice cold again, the wall rebuilt. "Go, and stay where I put you." Lila watched him disappear into the smoke with Enzo, a part of her breaking. Sal grabbed her arm, his grip like iron this time, and dragged her back to the car. Later that night, in a sterile, private clinic, a doctor finished stitching Dario's side. He had lost blood, but he was fine. "You were lucky," the doctor said. Dario just stared at the wall. He waited until the doctor left, leaving him alone with Enzo. "That man we caught," Dario said. "The one who broke into her apartment. Where is he?" "Our holding facility, South Side," Enzo said. "I want him questioned again. I want to know who told Costas about the locket, but first, I need something else." He looked at Enzo, his pale eyes burning with a desperate, reckless gamble. "Get a sample of her DNA," he ordered. "A hair from her room, a glass, I don't care, and get a sample of mine." Enzo raised an eyebrow. "Sir?" "You heard me. Get them to a lab, a private one that doesn't ask questions and that you trust with your life. I want a paternity test. Run it against Alberto Mancini's stored medical files, and run her against me. Dario. The documents. The birth certificate. The documents say what my father paid them to say," Dario snarled, sitting up, wincing as his stitches pulled. "He paid a woman to disappear with a child. He would pay a clinic to falsify a record. I looked at her tonight. Enzo. I held her. That is not my sister." He was gambling his sanity on a feeling, on the desperate, impossible hope that the one woman who made him feel human was not the one woman he could never have. "I want the truth," he said, his voice dropping. "Once and for all, whatever it is." The wait for the DNA results was a private, cold hell. Dario sat in his study, his healing side a dull throb, and stared at the dark mahogany of his desk. He had called Lila his sister. He had kissed her with a desperation that, in hindsight, felt like a sickness. The self-loathing was a familiar coat, one he hadn't worn in years, but it settled on his shoulders with a suffocating weight. He had rejected her, disgusted, and in doing so, had become his father's son in a way he had never wanted. The door opened, and Enzo entered. He didn't carry a file. He didn't have his usual impassive mask. He looked, for the first time in their long association, hesitant. "Boss," he started, "just tell me. Enzo. Is she my sister?" Dario's voice was dead, devoid of hope. "No, sir." Dario's head snapped up. The air, which had been too thick to breathe, rushed into his lungs. "What did you say?" "We ran your sample against hers. There is zero genetic relation. You are strangers." A tremor went through Dario, a release of tension so profound he felt lightheaded. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. "My father," he managed, his throat tight. "The birth certificate. A forgery," Enzo said. "A brilliant one. Paid for by your father. But it was a lie. We ran her DNA against Alberto's archived medical files. No match. Lila Romano is not a Mancini." "She's not my sister," Dario repeated, the words a prayer, an absolution. He closed his eyes, the image of her face in the alley, shattered by his rejection, burning in his mind. He had tortured her. For nothing. "But there is more," Enzo said, his voice becoming grim. The DNA confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. I found Angela's friend, an old woman named Maria, living in Westview. I encouraged her to talk. Dario's relief vanished, replaced by a cold dread. Go on. Angela Romano was pregnant with your father's child, a son, but she miscarried. 6 months in, she never told Alberto. She let him keep paying for her silence. She hated him. Boss, she wanted revenge. Enzo's words hung in the air. Revenge? When Luca ran away that night, he didn't go to the bus station. He went to the one person in the estate who ever showed him any kindness. Angela, she saw her chance. She convinced him their father would hunt him down, that he was in mortal danger. She stole him. Dario. She hid him at her friend Maria's house, using Alberto's money to pay for their new life. She raised her own daughter, Lila, under a false identity, a child she'd had with someone else long before. She kept Lila terrified, invisible, using the Mancini name as both a shield and a curse. The locket, it was her trophy, a reminder of the son she did take. Dario felt the blood drain from his face. All this time, a lie. Where is he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. Enzo, where is Luca? Enzo looked away. The first time he had ever broken his boss's gaze. He's been gone a long time. Dario, he was a sick kid, weak lungs. They were living in hiding and couldn't risk a real hospital. He died of pneumonia 10 years ago. He was 17. Maria buried him under the name Leo Bianchi. The news was a physical blow. Dario stumbled back, his hand over his mouth. Gone. The ghost he had been chasing. The guilt he had carried for 12 years. It was all for a boy who had died of a fever. Alone, under a false name. Stolen by a bitter woman. And Lila, she was the ultimate victim, a pawn in her mother's vengeful game, lied to, her entire identity a fabrication, and he, in his blind arrogance, had thrown her into the very fire Angela had tried to hide her from. "Get the car!" Dario snarled, grabbing his jacket, his stitches pulling in protest. "Get me to the lake house! Now!" Lila was in the sterile, glass-walled living room, watching Sophia sleep. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Not since Dario had looked at her with such profound revulsion. She was a ghost, a non-person. She was a Mancini, a name that felt like a curse. The front door of the safe house crashed open. She sprang to her feet, her heart seizing. Just as Dario filled the doorway, he was breathing hard, his face a mask of desperation and pain. He looked at her, his pale eyes raw. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice shaking, grabbing the small backpack she had packed. "I'm taking Sophia. You don't have to see me ever again. I won't be a problem for you." "Stop," he said, his voice rough. He took a step toward her. "No, don't come near me," she cried, flinching back. "I know what I am to you. I saw your face. Just let us go." "It was a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Lila, it was all a lie." She froze. "What?" "The birth certificate. It was a forgery. Your mother. She faked it, all of it." He was in front of her now, his hands gripping her arms, forcing her to look at him. "I ran the DNA. You are not my sister. You are not a Mancini. You're not related to me in any way." The words seemed to echo in the room. Nonsensical. Impossible. I don't understand," she whispered. "Angela lied," he said, his voice softening, his grip gentling. "She lied about everything," he told her. He told her about the miscarriage, about revenge, about the calculated theft of a runaway boy. He told her about Luca, how he had died. Not in an alley, but in a strange bed, of a simple, treatable illness. Lila listened, her body growing numb, the locket, her mother's frantic, paranoid protection, the constant fear, the whispered warnings to stay invisible. It was all a lie, not to protect him, but to protect her, Angela. When he finished, a terrible, cold silence filled the room. Lila looked past him, her eyes vacant. "Lila," he said, his voice thick with a pain that mirrored her own. She pulled from his grasp, a broken, dry sob tearing from her throat. She stumbled back, shaking her head. "My whole life," she whispered. My mother." The dam broke, but it wasn't grief for Luca, or for the loss of a family she never had. It was for the woman who had raised her in a prison of fear. She lied to me. She wept, her knees giving way. She sank to the floor, her hands covering her face. She made me live like a ghost. She was so afraid. But it wasn't for me. It was for her. She used me. She used a dead boy's picture, and she couldn't say it, that her mother's love had been tangled in a web of such profound hate. "Lila!" Dario knelt in front of her, his heart breaking. He pulled her hands away from her face, his own eyes shining with an unshed grief. "She was wrong. She was twisted by what my father did, but she kept you. She protected you in the only way she knew how. She buried you with her." He pulled her against him, his arms a steel cage, his hand cradling the back of her head. He just held her as she shattered, her sobs a raw, animal sound of betrayal. She wasn't a Romano. She wasn't a Mancini. She was no one. She cried until she was empty, her body limp against his, her breath just a ragged hitch. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his lips brushing her hair. "I'm so sorry for what he did, and for what I did, for what I said." She pulled back, her face a mess of tears. She looked at him, this terrifying, violent, gentle man who was the only fixed point in her collapsing world. "So you're not," she whispered, her voice raw. "No," he said, his voice a low growl. "I am not your brother." His hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb wiping a tear from her cheek. The kiss was not a question, and it was not a collision. It was a conclusion. It was a slow, deep, devastating claim. It was the sealing of a truth that had finally been unearthed. His lips moved over hers with an aching, possessive tenderness, a silent promise to burn away every lie she had ever been told. When he pulled back, they were both shaking. "Come on," he said, pulling her to her feet. "Let's go home." He drove her back to the estate. The city lights of Bellevue spread out below them like a field of diamonds. He didn't take her to the guest suite. He led her to the terrace, the one where he had first kissed her, the air cold and sharp. He stood behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, her back fitting against his chest as if she'd been carved for it. "I don't know who I am," she whispered to the glittering, indifferent city. "I do," he murmured, his lips against her temple. "You are the woman who brought my brother's ghost home, and you're the one who set me free." He led her to his room. It was nothing like the rest of the house. It was dark, spare, dominated by a massive bed and a wall of glass that overlooked the city. The only light came from the fireplace, casting flickering, amber shadows. The air was thick with everything they hadn't said, everything they had felt. He stood before her, his pale eyes dark, drinking her in. "Lila," he said, his voice a rough velvet. He didn't move. He waited. He was giving her the choice she had never had. She stepped toward him, her hands rising, trembling, to rest on his chest. That was all the answer he needed. His movements were slow, reverent. He didn't take it. He worshipped. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I'm going to make you forget every day you ever felt afraid," he whispered. He kissed her, long and deep, a kiss of profound, desperate relief. His hand slid down her neck, over her shoulders, pushing her thin jacket from her arms. He unbuttoned her blouse, his knuckles a hot brand against her skin. She shivered, her eyes fluttering closed. He undressed her with an agonizing patience, his gaze tracing every line of her body as it was revealed in the firelight. When she stood before him, her arms instinctively crossing over her chest, he made a low sound in his throat and gently pulled them away. "Don't hide from me," he murmured, "ever again." He lifted her, his arms strong and sure around her, and carried her to the bed. He laid her on the cool sheets, his eyes never leaving hers as he tore off his own shirt, the bandage on his side a stark white against his skin. He came down over her, his body shielding hers, his weight a promise, a comfort. He didn't kiss her mouth. He kissed her eyelids, her temples, the pulse that hammered in her throat. He kissed the scars on her hand from the night of the break-in. "Dario," she breathed, her hands tangling in his hair, her back arching, a desperate, unspoken need rising in her. "I know," he whispered, his forehead pressing against hers. "I'm here." Their lovemaking was not a frenzy. It was a slow, aching, tender exploration. It was the healing of two wounds, the desperate, gentle binding of two souls who had been utterly alone. He watched her, his eyes locked on hers as he moved, a silent vow passing between them in the flickering light. It was a claiming, a surrender, a homecoming that was equal parts aching tenderness and raw, undeniable need. Afterward, in the quiet dark, she lay curled against him, her ear over his heart, listening to the strong, steady beat. His arms were locked around her, his chin resting on the top of her head. "No one," he whispered, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "No one touches you now but me. That is a promise." The peace was absolute. It lasted exactly 1 hour. A soft, urgent knock came at the bedroom door. "Boss, I'm sorry, it's urgent." Dario's entire body tensed. He gently untangled himself from Lila, who watched, her heart sinking. As he pulled on his pants, the man who had held her with such reverence was gone, replaced by the one who had stood in the alley. He opened the door a crack, speaking in low, harsh tones to Enzo. Lila couldn't hear the words, but she saw Dario's shoulders stiffen, his hand clenching into a fist. He shut the door and turned back to her, his face carved from ice. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up, pulling the sheet around her. "The Costas, the man we've been questioning, he finally broke. The order to grab you, to get the locket, didn't come from them." "Then who?" "It came from inside my own family," Dario said, his voice lethal. "Someone in my circle leaked the information. They knew the locket was a ghost. They knew it would draw me out, make me reckless. They used you to get to me." "A traitor," Lila whispered, the word tasting like ash. "My father's capos. Some of them don't like my way of doing things. They think I'm weak." He began pacing, his energy a low, humming vibration of violence. "And they see you as my weakness." Lila watched him, the man who was planning a war to protect her. A new, cold anger solidified in her chest. They had used her. They had used Luca's memory. They had nearly destroyed her. She swung her legs out of bed, pulling the sheet with her, and stood. "Then let me help you." Dario stopped pacing. "No, it's over. You're staying here, where I can protect you. I'm tired of being protected." "Dario," she said, her voice hard, clear, "I'm tired of being the victim. They think I'm your weakness. Good, let them think about it. Let me be the bait." "Lila, don't be ridiculous. I'm not putting you in the line of fire." "I've been in the line of fire since the day I met you," she retorted, stepping toward him. "You want to find the man who did this. He's in hiding. He's afraid of you. But he's not afraid of me. Let me go back. Let me be the girl from the restaurant, the weak link. He'll come for me again, to silence me, or to use me. And when he does, you'll be there." He stared at her, a dawning respect in his eyes. This was not the trembling girl he'd found at Rena's. This was a woman forged in his fire. She was right. It was a desperate, dangerous, perfect plan. "No," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes," she insisted. He was silent for a long moment, the muscle in his jaw working. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to grip her chin, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "Fine. We do it your way." Her heart leaped. "On one condition," he said, his pale eyes burning into hers. "You never leave my sight, not for a second. You don't breathe without me knowing. If you are the bait, I am the hook. Understood?" Lila looked into the eyes of the man who owned her, body and soul. Understood. Rena's trattoria was exactly as she had left it, the same smell of stale wine, the same vinyl tablecloths, the same flickering fluorescent light in the back hallway. But as Lila Romano walked through the front door, she felt like a ghost returning to a life that was no longer hers. She was wearing her old black uniform, which Mrs. Venti had pressed for her at the estate. Around her neck, resting on the outside of her shirt, was the silver locket. It felt impossibly heavy, a lead weight that was pulling the trap shut. The restaurant was almost empty, just the early, pre-dinner stragglers. She wasn't scheduled to work, Marco, Rena's son, had been convinced by Enzo to call her in. A last-minute emergency shift. Dario's plan was simple, and in its simplicity, terrifying. The traitor, the one who had leaked the Locket's existence to the Costas, was in Rena's. He was someone who knew her, someone who had watched her every day, someone who would see her return, alone and unprotected. As a loose end that needed to be tied, the restaurant was a stage, and every person in it was an actor. She saw Enzo, in a cheap blazer, sitting at the bar, nursing a beer, looking for all the world like a tired salesman. Two other Mancini men sat at a table by the window, arguing over a plate of calamari. They were all there to die for her, if needed. And then she saw him. In the corner booth, the one where it had all started, Dario sat, just as he had before, in a dark, perfectly tailored suit. He was not looking at her. He was staring at an empty espresso cup, his stillness a vacuum in the noisy room. He was her promise. He was the hook. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. She was terrified, but as she met his gaze, just for a second across the room, she felt a cold, hard certainty settle in her. She was not the girl who had dropped that locket. She was the woman who had come back to claim it. She walked to the back, tied on her apron, and grabbed a tray. "What do you need, Marco?" she asked, her voice only trembling slightly. "Just table 4. And the phone has been ringing. Just work." Marco stammered. He was pale, terrified of the men in his dining room. She worked for an hour. She delivered bread. She took orders. She refilled water glasses. With every step, she felt the locket bounce against her chest, a beacon. She could feel the eyes of the traitor on her, trying to figure out why she was back. It was Paolo who finally approached her. Paolo, with the kind eyes, who had worked at Rena's for 5 years, who had covered her shift when Sophia was sick. "Lila," he said, his voice a low, friendly hiss as she passed the bar. "My God, where have you been? We were all so worried." "It's a long story, Paolo," she said, forcing a weary, scared smile. "It's been a nightmare." "You look terrible," he said, his eyes full of a false sympathy. He glanced around. Enzo was watching the football game on the bar television. Dario was staring into his cup. "Here." He pushed a glass of water toward her from the service tray. "You look like you're about to faint. Drink this." Lila looked at the glass. It was just water. But as she looked up, she saw Paolo's hand. He was gripping a napkin, and his knuckles were white. He wasn't being kind. He was being urgent. This was it. "Thank you, Paolo," she whispered, her hand shaking as she reached for the glass. "I'm so thirsty." His eyes were locked on her, a strange, hungry intensity. He was watching to see the locket go dead. She lifted the glass, her gaze meeting Dario's. He was watching now. His pale eyes were flat, lethal. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Lila brought the glass almost to her lips. Then, with a small, convincing gasp, she dropped it. The glass shattered on the floor. "Oh, no," she cried, genuine panic mixing with the act. "I'm so clumsy. I'm sorry, Paolo. I'll clean it up." Paolo's face was a mask of fury. The mask of the kind waiter was gone, replaced by the rat in the trap. He had failed. He knew he wouldn't get another chance. He grabbed her arm. "You stupid girl, you—" "Hey," Enzo's voice from the bar. "Leave her alone, pal. It was an accident." Paolo spun, his eyes wild. He saw Enzo, a threat. He saw the men at the window, who were now standing. He saw Dario, rising slowly from the corner booth. He was made. "You!" he shrieked at Lila. "You brought them! You were supposed to be nobody!" He pulled a small, silver pistol from the waistband of his apron. The restaurant erupted in screams. The few real customers dived for the floor. "Paolo, no!" Lila screamed. Stumbling back, Enzo was already moving, but Paolo was desperate. He fired a shot, wild into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Lila, just as Dario had drilled her, didn't run. She dropped, scrambling under the nearest empty table, her hands over her head. Enzo and the other man were on Paolo. A blur of motion, a clash of dark suits. Paolo was stronger than he looked, fueled by terror. He shoved Enzo back against the bar and raised the gun. his arm shaking. He wasn't aiming at Enzo. He was aiming at the table where Lila was hiding. No! Dario was not the boss, and he was not the man in the suit. He was a shadow, a force of pure, kinetic violence. He crossed the 10 feet of the dining room in 2 strides. He didn't go for the gun. He went for the man. He hit Paolo like a freight train, his shoulder connecting with the man's chest, driving him backward, and the gun clattered across the tile. There was a sickening, heavy thud as Paolo's head hit the edge of the solid oak bar. He didn't get up. The dining room was suddenly, shockingly silent, broken only by the sound of a woman sobbing at the window table and the tinny, cheerful sound of an old Italian song from the kitchen radio. Dario stood over Paolo's unmoving body, his chest heaving. His suit jacket was torn, his knuckles already bruising. He was an animal, his breathing ragged, his eyes searching the room with a wild, primal terror. Then, his gaze focused. He dropped to his knees, his hands hitting the floor. He crouched, looking under the table. Lila was curled into a small, tight ball, her hands over her face, the locket clutched in her fist. She was shaking so violently the entire table was rattling. "Lila," he breathed. She lowered her hands, her eyes wide, staring at him. She was crying, but she wasn't screaming. She was just watching him. This monster, her monster. He reached a hand under the table. It was shaking. His hand, the one that had just taken down a man, was trembling like a leaf. She uncurled and crept forward, her small, olive-skinned hand closing around his. He tugged gently, and she slid out into the wreckage of the dining room. He didn't stand. He stayed on his knees, in the broken glass and spilled water. He pulled her into his arms, his grip so tight it was painful, crushing her against his chest. His face was buried in her hair. She felt his body, solid and warm, vibrating with adrenaline. He said nothing, just held her. His eyes squeezed shut. Finally, he pulled back, his hands framing her face, his pale eyes searching hers with a desperate, raw intensity. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, his voice a broken rasp. Lila looked at him, at this terrifying, powerful man who was kneeling at her feet, shaking for her. Her fear evaporated, replaced by a wave of awe so profound it stole her breath. "You didn't," she whispered, her hand coming up to cover his. "You never will." In the aftermath, Dario moved with a speed and coldness that solidified his new reign. Paolo's confession, detailed and desperate, implicated 2 of his father's most trusted capos. They were the ones who had fed the Costas the information, hoping Dario's distraction would be his downfall, allowing them to seize control. Dario did not have them killed. He had them ruined. In a single quiet meeting, he exposed their bank records, their side deals, their betrayal. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laid out the facts. He banished them, stripping them of their power, their money, and their name, leaving them with nothing. It was a cold, surgical, and terrifying display of power. He had reorganized the Mancini syndicate, not with the brute force of his father, but with the sharp, merciless blade of his intellect, and at the center of this new empire. He built a fortress around Lila and Sophia. He found Lila that evening in his study, where she had waited for him. He was exhausted, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. He looked at her, and the cold boss was gone, replaced by the man. "It's done," he said. "They're gone. You're safe. Lila, truly, Sophia is safe. You never have to be afraid again." He moved to pour a drink, but Lila stepped in front of him. "I'm not weak." "Dario," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a new, hard strength. He stopped, his hand hovering over the decanter. "I never said you were." "You didn't have to," she said. Her eyes locked on his. "You treat me like I'm made of glass. You reorganized your entire world to build a wall around me. I love you for it. But I won't be your porcelain doll. I am not broken." She stepped into him, her hands flat on his chest, her head held high. "I was bait. I knew what I was doing. I am with you, in this, in all of it. I am yours, Dario, but I am not your weakness." He looked at her, truly seeing the steel he had helped to forge, a slow, genuine smile, the first she had ever seen, touched his lips. He cupped her face, his expression one of awe. "No," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "You are my strength." A few weeks later, they drove. They left the city, the guards, the darkness, and headed for the coast. They found the small, wind-beaten cemetery in the town where Luca had died. They found the plot Maria had described, marked only by a small, wooden cross. Dario carried a single, flat plaque of gray granite. He didn't speak. He knelt and placed it in the damp grass. The engraving was simple. Luca Mancini, 1985 to 2002. Brother found. They stood there for a long time as the cold, salt-laced wind whipped around them. Lila watched him, his back to her, his broad shoulders rigid. And then, for the first time since he was a boy, Dario Mancini cried. He didn't make a sound. His shoulders just shook. A silent, agonizing quake of grief for the brother he had lost, the guilt he had carried, and the decade of lies that had poisoned all of them. Lila didn't touch him. She didn't offer comfort. She simply stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm, a silent, unwavering presence, sharing the impossible weight. Life found a new rhythm. Sophia was enrolled in a new private school, her sharp edges softened by security and an unlimited data plan. Lila was, for the first time, simply allowed to be. Dario found her in the garden, the one place that felt like hers. Spring had come to Bellevue, and the roses were beginning to bloom. She was sketching in a pad, her brow furrowed in concentration. He approached her quietly, his hands in his pockets. He seemed nervous, a state so alien to him it was almost comical. "What is it?" she asked, smiling, putting her pencil down. "Did someone declare war again?" "No," he said, sitting beside her on the stone bench. "It's quiet." He opened his hand, in his palm. It wasn't a diamond. It wasn't a ring. It was her locket, his locket. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its command. "I don't know how to be the man you deserve. I have nothing to offer you but a complicated, dangerous life. But it's your life, too. Lila, if you'll have it." He didn't kneel, but he turned to her, his pale eyes completely open, vulnerable. "I love you. Marry me." Lila looked at the silver oval in his palm, the face of the boy who had brought them together in such a strange, violent way. She reached out, her fingers covering his, enclosing the locket in their shared warmth. "This time," she whispered, her eyes shining with tears, "it belongs to both of us." The final scene was in a restaurant. The sign over the door, painted in elegant gold script, read Lila's Trattoria. The room was bright, the floors polished, the tablecloths real, white linen. Lila, her dark hair pinned up, was laughing as she handed a plate to an elderly customer. She was visibly pregnant, a soft, lovely swell under her simple blue dress. She was not a waitress. She was an owner. She was home. And in the corner booth, the one by the window, sat Dario Mancini. He was nursing a single espresso. He was watching his wife. He saw her rub her back, and he smiled. A man who had once been a mask of cold rage, a man who had lived in the shadows of his past, now sat in the sunlight. He was proud. He was protective. And finally, after a lifetime of war, he was at peace. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of love and danger. And please share your thoughts on this story in English. We appreciate all of your support.